guys there to compare.
I didn't either.
I said, yep, the best ones are in Glendale. So much for that.
Well, might not be that
We
dire.
need a new hangout, Dave.
Yeah. I haven't been there in a,
Maybe.
I haven't been there in a few, no, that's a week or two.
Your mic. Call to order the April 27th meeting of the Glendale Housing Authority. May we have a roll call, please?
Authority members: Draymond.
Here.
Friedman.
Here.
Mincy.
Here.
Najarian.
Here?
Brazzian.
Here.
Weaver.
Here,
Chair Quintero.
Here. Will you read your report?
The agenda for the April 27, 2010 regular meeting of the Glendale Housing Authority was posted on Thursday, April 22nd, 2010 on the bulletin board outside City Hall.
Okay, next, please.
Next is approval of minutes.
So moved.
second.
The minutes stand approved as submitted, no abstentions. 5 is oral communications.
There was one card submitted for oral communications. Discussion is limited time, is not part of this agenda. Each speaker is allowed 5 minutes. Members of the Housing Authority may question or respond to the speaker, but there will be no debate or decision, and the matter may be referred to staff through the Executive Director for investigation and report.
Mike Mohill.
Good afternoon, gentlemen. Mike Mohill, longtime resident, Chairman Quintero. Excuse me. Talk about housing. Chairman Quintero, you mentioned the word Soviet-style housing apartments in South Glendale. Those were pretty strong words you used the other day.
Stand by those words.
Good. I'm glad you do. My question is this, sir. What has the city done to change that type of housing? Have we downsized the apartment buildings? I keep seeing the buildings going bigger and bigger. Mr. Weaver complains it's not compatible with the neighborhood, the colors. An architect came here and said, you have a 3-story building here, and you all said, oh no, it's only a mezzanine. Bulk, bulk, bulk. Where's the parking? Does anybody besides my wife and myself walk South Glendale at least once or twice a week and see what's going on in the streets of South Glendale, Chevy Chase, Wilson, whatever, okay, Garfield? I never see anybody. You guys, pardon me, probably just drive your cars from your house. Thank Ms. Freeman, okay? But what goes on in South Glendale? Mr. Weaver always tells us he goes 3 times a week to the Americana. Sir, I've never seen you walk the streets of Glen Oaks Canyon where I live, and we live together. Okay? What's going on in South? Why are we not downsizing that place? Let's revitalize South Glendale with smaller buildings, not 3 and 4 stories. I can tell you places that they have 3 and 4 stories. Dorn and Isabel. Okay. Now there's a nice area called Piedmont Avenue in Lexington, which is a tree-lined area. It's a setback. Mr. Draymond, you know that area. Isn't that beautiful?
Gorgeous.
In South Glendale. Why can't we do something like that for the other parts of South Glendale? Am I asking too much to have, we're going to revitalize South Glendale. A lot of areas revitalized, but not going with high density. High density. The proposed entertainment district on Maryland Avenue. 5-story. Mrs. Friedman said, hey, if we need to go 5 or 2 more stories high to make it pencil out economically, why don't we downsize it economically and make those units become more valuable? Why do we, by having more floors, perhaps you may lessen the value of those apartments. West LA was once upon a time, had cheap housing. Now it's hard to find housing in West LA. We need to change our direction of how we are handling South Glendale. Do we want to continue having Soviet-style apartments? Why can't we change the zoning? I remember coming up here about Glen Oaks Canyon, and they said back in the 90s, somebody from the planning department decided to make everybody, the setbacks different without asking anybody, but they said it was going to be easier. Well, why don't we just make it easier when the planning department say, you know what, let's go back to the original housing. I'm going to propose that we make Glendale a historic district. Every area is going to be historic, not just Royal Canyon, not just in Montrose, not just in, let's make Glendale historic and put all the setbacks where they were back in the 20s and the 30s and the 40s. Then we can reduce the size. We have more population than we need than Pasadena. They have quality building. We got a lot of you-know-what. You know how that's spelt. We don't need that. Let's look for quality construction. Start by bringing the setbacks back where they were in the 20s and the 30s. That's a good beginning. No more any building over no building over 2-story. If you go over 3-story, I want to see a lot of green space in that building for the residents. Tree-lined streets. What happened to that in South Glendale? Did we run out of money to have the city landscape the parking area? Okay, again, I'm looking forward to seeing my city councilmen walking the streets of South Glendale on a regular basis, and they'll see what's going on in South Glendale. Thank you.
Mr. Draymond.
A question from the chair. When you said Soviet-style apartment construction, my impression was that you weren't speaking about the number of units. You were speaking about the aesthetic, the style of
quality.
construction, the quality of the construction, the sort of giant refrigerator box-looking nature that was just built and built and built and built and built for
exactly
a decade
right.
and a half.
Yeah.
Mostly in South Glendale, but not exclusively in South Glendale.
Well, let me just add, I mean, Mr. Mohill made multiple points. We don't have time to rebut every one of them, but in general, probably before you started coming to city council meetings, in fact, we did, quote, downsize, although that's not the term we used, but we did, in fact, have multiple hearings and generally brought down the amount of units that could be built in multifamily neighborhoods. In addition, we added standards so that the designs required more setbacks, et cetera, et cetera. So, any other comment?
I wanted to
Mr.
finish my
Draymond.
comments. Thank you, Mr. Chair. The other thing I wanted to touch on was simply that the apartment complex that Mr. Mohill was referring to recently, the affordable project, where is the parking? The parking is on site for that. There were people here that were making comments about, you know, where are the people from the Alex Theater going to park, and where are the people? I mean, it's just totally unrelated. Totally unrelated. I don't think Mr. Mohill was the one making that comment, but others were. But the answer is to that question, it's on site. That's where the parking is for that particular complex. I'm curious, do we know how many apartment houses have been built in the city of Glendale from, say, mid-2007 to the present? Because we keep hearing building and building and building and building. I'm just not aware of them. And not because of any long-range planning on the city, I think, so much as the economy.
Yeah. That's exactly right.
But I don't think there's been that many. Mr. Falk, you know.
There's a big one at Durand and Isabel. It's been under construction for about a year and a half now.
Yeah.
So, I
I don't have the precise number, but actually as a part of the permitting process for the last 2 years, it's exactly what we've been looking at, because our permanent revenue has diminished to about half. And the issue is that we simply have no new construction going on. We actually have more permits being issued, but they are for remodeling, and they're for kitchen replacements, and they're for window replacements, they're for upgrades of existing buildings, but there's no financing available for new constructions. There simply are no new apartments. Anything that you've seen being wrapped up is something that started years ago and was in process.
Yeah, my reason for raising the issue, Chairman Quintero, is that not just Mr. Mohill's comments, but also we see in the newspaper quite often letters where people are saying, you know, why are we continuing to build high-rises? Why are we continuing to build apartment houses? I don't know where these buildings are. Are they sure they're in Glendale? Because to my knowledge, we haven't built a high-rise in this city in a very long time. I don't know where the luxury condos that have been built recently in this city. I mean, when I say recently, I mean in years. Or this massive multi-unit that supposedly is going on. I just have no idea where that is. There have been some, as Mr. McFall says, that have been completed, that were projects that had started some time ago and already had their financing in place. Anyway.
Mr. Mincy, you had a comment?
Mr. Mohill, sometimes you come and tell us what's wrong with the city. But I want to give you a compliment of what a fine letter you wrote this week on the Americana. It was all positive, it was well-written, and I looked twice to see if it was Mike Mohill, but it was very good.
Thank you.
Just a comment on a bit of 30 seconds on the history of the zoning. Actually, probably the last thing we would want to do, and I know that the community is often confused about this, is to go back to our previous zoning and our previous setbacks, because the underlying zoning in the southern portion of Glendale was high density. It's been in that place in that since the 20s and 30s. The then council actually was trying to encourage high density units. Now, what was built were bungalows, but they were underbuilding on the site, and it was in the latter part of the 60s and early 70s, developers started figuring out there is tremendous value in this land because despite it looking like single-family residential, it was high-density housing, and so took advantage of that, bought properties very cheaply, and built the style of housing that Mr. Councilmember Quintero has referred to, and it was the council at that time and then a later council and this council that has continued to downzone those and to place restrictions so that that kind of construction can't take place, increase the setbacks, both front and side setbacks, to make it more reasonable. Unfortunately, the horse is out of the barn in a lot of situations. There's simply nothing to do with that at this point.
Okay, next, please.
If there are no other comments, is there a motion to adjourn?
Adjourn.
Second.
We are adjourned.
Okay. Welcome to the April 27th, 2010 meeting of the Glendale